All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we're talking about the importance that the Falcons' running game improves, as well as finishing our conversation with Matt Waldman, the rookie scouting portfolio, about Falcons rookies Drake London, Desmond Ridder.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this preeminent Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And like all Locked On Sports Atlanta and Locked On podcasts, you can find Locked On Falcons free and available Monday through Friday on your preferred podcast platform, whether that be Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, as well as on YouTube. And you can get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops, although this is one example where that didn't happen because my internet was down. But never mind that. We'll talk about today's conversation later with Matt Waldman. We talked with Matt last week about Tyler Algier. I think that was last Thursday, and we'll sort of finish up our conversation with him talking about Drake London and Desmond Ridder, and then we'll get his thoughts on that. But before we jump into that, I do want to talk a little bit about the Falcons running game. Tomorrow's episode will be finishing or continuing, I should say, our training camp previews, talking about the running back position. And I think it's worthwhile to have at least a little bit of a conversation about the importance of the Falcons running game, that it improves this year, in large part due to my belief that Arthur Smith's offense is sort of predicated on running the football and running the football effectively and keeping the offense on schedule and all those various things. That if he can do that, then this offense has a chance of being decent, right? Again, we're not going to say great, but decent, right? A unit that's no longer like they were last year, struggling to score 20 points in on any given Sunday, and a team that should be expected to score anywhere between 20 and 25 points, and maybe even have a couple of 30 burgers on hand if they can generate those explosive plays that we're also sorely lacking. And the Falcons' running game is sort of predicated off of the outside zone rushing attack. They ran the third most zone runs of any team, according to Pro Football Focus, behind the Bears and the Vikings. A little shy of about 70% of their rushing plays were zone based. And we know that those were tended to be outside zone because when we look at Football Outsiders, directional running tracking, that the Falcons were dead last in the NFL in runs up the middle. And by a particularly wide margin. So we know they weren't running a ton of inside zone as part of their rushing scheme. So we know that the Falcons are very likely to maintain the outside zone running scheme. The free agent pickups that they signed were guys from Chicago that were very versed in that type of scheme. We know that Tyler Algier at BYU ran behind a outside zone rushing attack. So it's very unlikely that we're going to see major changes to that. But I do kind of wonder if we'll see a little bit more between the tackles stuff than we did a year ago, particularly with Tyler Algier. And I think that's where he's best suited for. Talked about that on Friday, I believe, in the scouting report episode. And I wonder if the Falcons running scheme will be a little bit less basic, a little bit more exotic this year than it was a year ago. And that was one of the criticisms that I had for Arthur Smith's play calling on a episode a week or two ago, talking about how the run scheme was probably a little too basic. And I feel like obviously there's nothing inherently wrong with being basic, particularly if you're effective. The Falcons weren't effective in the running attack. And so my personal preference, and maybe others have a different preference, but I think it's probably a little bit better to be a little bit more exotic in your running game in general than being basic. Obviously, the effectiveness matters, but I'd rather be exotic and ineffective than basic and ineffective, if that's my personal preference. But the other factor that plays out in this running attack beyond the running back position and the scheme is just how effective they're going to be, and that's heavily based off of Dwayne Ledford, right? The Falcons are essentially running it back with the same starting five this season, which is a stark change from most teams that had offensive lines play as poorly as ours did a year ago, most of those teams, went out and got 2 or 3 or more new starters. Carolina is a good example of that. And the Falcons are running it back with the same starting five. And essentially what that means is that they're making a big bet on their offensive line coach, Dwayne Ledford, getting more out of these guys in his second year than he did in year one. And that would be a welcome change if Dwayne Ledford can pull that off. The Falcons coaching along the offensive line prior to Arthur Smith's arrival and Dwayne Ledford's arrival was not particularly good. It was one of the position coaches I was frequently criticizing, and we often talk about coaching staff, and we tend to focus on Arthur Smith and Dean Pease, but these position coaches really do bring a lot to the table in terms of player development. The other factor with Dwayne Ledford, that they're kind of betting on him as well, even if they don't run it back with the same starting five. And we do see changes, left guard or center competition, there's right tackle competition, but particularly the left guard and center positions. And I've talked about this before in the pod, where, in the world where the Falcons are replacing with Jalen Mayfield with Justin Schaefer at left guard and Matt Hennessy with Drew Dolman at center. We know that, maybe Elijah Wilkinson that's going to be more in the mix at that left guard position. But for the time being, let's just say Justin Schaefer. One of the things I've mentioned on the podcast previously was the fact that basically Schaefer and Dahlman are basically what Mayfield and Hennessy were a year ago, right? Schaefer is a rookie like Mayfield was a year ago, is very raw, sort of unpolished, questionable scheme fit. That's basically how we described Jalen Mayfield a year ago. Drew Dahlman's an undersized second-year center with very limited starting experience. Good scheme fit, however, but that's how exactly we would describe Matt Hennessy a year ago. And so even in a world where those guys wind up, taking their jobs, as they say, you're going to need Dwayne Ledford to step it up if it's going to get a different result, that we're not still having the conversation 6+ months ago from now saying, oh, well, we still need left guard, we still need center or right tackle help as well as we're saying right now. So the Falcons are making a big bet on Dwayne Ledford. We'll see if that bet pays off for them. I'm hopeful. I'm not particularly optimistic it will make a major step forward. Again, can't expect Dwayne Ledford to work miracles and produce a top 10 unit, but certainly something that's closer to middle of the pack would be a huge boon for the Falcons moving forward. And it's certainly an indicator that this coaching staff is doing the right thing and on the right path. So we'll see how that plays out this year in terms of the running game. Tomorrow we'll break down the training camp preview of the running back position, talk about Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson and their usage and what roles we can expect from them, some of the competition for some depth spots. And as well, we got to talk fullback. So we'll be locked on fullbacks for at least a portion of tomorrow's episode. So we'll check that out then. But today we still have more to come from Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. We'll just sort of jump into that conversation with Drake London coming up with Matt. So if you need a little bit of a reintroduction to Matt before we get there, he's done a lot of great work with the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, something that he's produced over many years, breaking down quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, pre and post draft, has a little bit of a fantasy bent. So if you're looking for input and advice for how you should, stack your boards for your dynasty drafts for this most recent rookie class, it'll give you some insight into that. But Matt also has a great insight into the evaluation process of these positions and players and the nuances of the game. So when he says a thing, it's worth paying attention, and we'll see what he has to say about Drake London and his scheme fit and how well he can be utilized in this Arthur Smith offense before we talk to him a little bit, some about the concerns he has for Desmond Ridder and his transition to the next level. But before we get there, guys, I want to remind you that the NBA draft is this Thursday, and one live NBA draft show is just not enough for the Locked On Podcast Network. Why not have the entire Locked On NBA channel go live Thursday night? So your favorite NBA team will be, breaking down what their plans are on draft night. And so if you're a Hawks fan, you can check out Locked On Hawks. Make sure you subscribe to it on YouTube or whatever your favorite NBA team so that you can catch the live Thursday night pre-draft process. So go check that out on your preferred podcast platform. And guys, I also want to tell you about the folks at Blue Nile, the jewelry experts there that are not only helping you find that perfect gift for that special someone, and they have experts available 24/7 on hand via phone, via chat to help you pick your most memorable gift that's going to fit your budget. And you can also get their experts to help you, handcraft that perfect one of a kind engagement ring by choosing size, shape, um, clarity, and style. And that's what's great about the experts at Blue Nile. And they can help you make this moment sparkle for you, whatever that moment for you is. And you also get $50 off a purchase of $500 or more if you use the code locked on. That exclusive does include engagement. So just use that code locked on. That's LOCKEDON. And don't worry, every order is insured. It ships free. It arrives in discreet package, so it won't give away what's inside. So shop stress free. Find your forever piece by going to BlueNile.com today. Now let's move the conversation to Drake London. And in the pre-draft RSP rookie scouting portfolio, you labeled his ceiling as T. Higgins like option on the outside, a Marcus Colston like potential on the inside, and you also mentioned his floor as Mike Williams, which I'm assuming is the Chargers version of Mike Williams. There's been so many Mike Williams in the NFL at wide
Big
receiver.
Mike, yeah.
It's and I know you go back a ways, so you will bring back USC Mike Williams or whatever the case may be as a player comp if you think the player fits, but that's the Chargers Clemson version of Mike Williams. And now that Drake London finds himself in Atlanta, and Arthur Smith has talked about playing him both as an outside and inside receiver, where do you sort of like his potential on that sort of spectrum here in Atlanta?
I like it long term. I think long term it's a fantastic fit because you give him his presence on the inside, provides support and forces attention from safeties in a manner where now you have a justifiable player to kind of enforce what you want to do, so that there's more opportunities for one-on-one matchups for Kyle Pitts on the outside. So you have a little bit more of a mix and match thing going on. Whereas last year you had a bunch of smaller players who were not as versatile, maybe from a route running, above the rim receiving standpoint, because with Julio Jones gone, with Calvin Ridley gone, you really didn't have many threats on that level who could really enforce, kind of a boundary for defenders. If defenders say, we're just going to double or bracket or pay more attention in our zone to Pitts all day long and force the other guys to beat us, there weren't other guys that were really going to make them pay, other than maybe some long yak runs from Cordero Patterson after the catch, or maybe occasionally him going out on a bullet route or a wheel route, or maybe using him on the outside. But I think now with the physicality and the size that London offers and the build-up speed that he has as a route runner, and he's a decent enough route runner to run an expanded route tree, you get a player who can make defenses pay when they tip their hand too much towards Pitts. So that's a good thing. Short term, I'm a little mixed, more because of the next guy that we're going to be talking about and their current quarterback, Marcus Mariota, because I think the longer you force either player to hold on to the ball, and we'll get more into Ridder in a minute, but the longer you force Mariota to hold on to the ball, the worse his decision making has gotten historically. He's mobile, but Tom Brady is a statue, and he manages a pocket far better than most quarterbacks. And Mariota is a great example of a guy who's got great mobility, but not very good management at all. And the longer he's invested in the play, the worse the outcome often is with him. And I think with Atlanta, their offensive line, I'm skeptical that it's going to be much better than last year, which means that teams are going to force Mariota to hold on to that ball and count on him to make enough big time mistakes that it can be to the defense's advantage. So long term, I like London if they find themselves a quarterback. Short term, I see him more as on the level of Colston maybe production wise 70 to 75% of what Colston did in his peak years, which is still good.
Yeah.
But it's not what it could be with the right quarterback.
Now, one of the questions I've asked a lot of people on the podcast over the last several weeks in regards to Drake London, sort of, because I like him more as an inside receiver in that Colston mold than an outside receiver. But I do kind of wonder, where do you sort of land on him being that sort of classic X receiver that we saw Arthur Smith utilize in AJ Brown, and obviously Julio Jones did that for years here in Atlanta in this sort of offense? Do you feel like London, if he's quote unquote square pegged into that role, or maybe you don't think it's a square peg, but if that's kind of where the Falcons sort of foresee him, do you think he can thrive in that role, or do you feel like more where I'm landing on, where it's like his value is more his versatility to play multitude of positions, and trying to force him into one specific role may limit his potential?
Yeah, I think the ultimate value is the versatility factor. And I'd like to see him inside, because those inside out breaking routes, like corner routes, sail routes, those types of routes are very good for what he does. But at the same time, he can run a dig just fine. I don't think he's on AJ Brown's level or Julio's level as a route runner. I mean, those are guys that can deliver double moves, and they threaten you both with great acceleration and speed, along with power, where it's more build up speed and power. And while that's something that can create respect, it creates more respect when your speed matches up better against safeties than it does cornerbacks. And cornerbacks aren't going to be intimidated by his speed. They're just going to, they'll respect it enough for certain routes, but they can play a little fast and loose with him in that regard, unless he develops a terrific double move, or terrific sets of double moves, and the play action game is respectable enough in Atlanta that it forces those types of binds for cornerbacks to possibly bite and then overplay. But I think that if you need him right now to run digs, run hooks, comebacks, the occasional deep out, he can do that for you and make the plays in tight coverage. But he's not a guy that, because of the fact that the deep game is more of one that's going to be more of a contested catch deep game for him, cornerbacks aren't going to respect that as much. So they're going to be playing him tight on a lot of those intermediate routes. So if they end up square pegging him like that, that does give him more downside. A good example of that with another team is Jalen Reagor, who hasn't had success and probably won't in Philadelphia. And maybe there are other reasons to this, but TCU's coach Gary Patterson told the Philadelphia organization before the draft that they misused him at TCU because they had to. They used him as more of an outside guy to go up and win balls with his athletic ability. And that worked in the Big 12, but he was more of an inside player. And early on, the first year, the Eagles misused him too and used him more as an outside guy, even though they were told that's not the way you probably want to use him in the league. And they did, and it was a colossal failure from their angle. And I don't think they ever really got past that. So it's one of those things that you don't want to see that happen with a guy like London, in terms of where he's put into such a narrow area that isn't even his strength. Like, to me, that's like it's kind of more of a supplementary positive to his game. An ancillary benefit that you get is that you can use him outside on certain fits, but he's more like of a plus version of Alan Lazard on the outside, where if you put him in trips and you try and confuse the defense playing one-on-one to where they miss the guy who's supposed to cover, London winds up not covering him at all due to the Atlanta's alignment, and now he's running free. That's what Lazard benefits from. He's a scheme player. He's a guy that most of his production comes from teams trying to scheme everything so that there's one target, and those scheme plays work once or twice a game at best. And then teams start to catch on. You've got to create something else original and put all your assets into, on that one play, into that one result working. And that's not as good as matchup players who, whether or not they're being covered one-on-one by the best player on the team, in that area of the field that they can still win on those occasions. And London has more matchup ability inside than he does outside.
Okay, there you go. Okay, guys, we still got more with Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, talking more about Desmond Ridder and some of the concerns he has with his ability to transition to the next level and be a high-level passer after expressing, his excitement somewhat for Drake London moving forward. But before we get into the Desmond Ridder portion of the conversation, I want to let you know that, the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is still going on all week long on your preferred podcast platform. You're getting the local Locked On experts, the Odyssey insiders, and so much more, breaking down the draft board in the lead up to this Thursday night's actual live NBA draft. Get the sort of practice run on the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft on your preferred podcast platform. Guys, I want to tell you about the folks at BetOnline, the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. Whether you're looking for the latest odds, contests, or player props, you name it, BetOnline has it all. And whether you're into the Stanley Cup Finals, you're into the NBA draft props, you're a Wimbledon person, Major League Baseball, you're trying to take advantage of the hot streak the Braves have been on recently, or you're in the boxing, esports, Vegas casino games, or football as well, you can put some futures bets on the NFL props for the season. Offensive Rookie of the Year, Drake London, Coach of the Year, Arthur Smith, Comeback Player of the Year, Marcus Mariota, or you can go, Desmond Ridder, Offensive Rookie of the Year. All you got to do is head on over to the website at betonline.net today to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Here with Matt Waldman of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, and we're finally talking about Desmond Ridder. And he was a player that you listed in your pre-draft report as one of the more overrated quarterback prospects in this upcoming draft class. So I guess, Matt, I'll give you the floor to tell the listeners and the viewers what were your major concerns surrounding Desmond Ridder and his potential transition to the NFL level.
Sure. And, this is a wacky quarterback class as a whole, because when I talk to other scouts and I'm not talking, media scouts, but like NFL guys, CFL guys, people who talk to other NFL guys who are doing football scouting for teams, everyone's been all over the place with this quarterback class. Some guys are they're high. It seemed like everyone had a different guy this is the only guy I draft. And then there were like three guys that everyone seemed to have that said, I wouldn't pick them, or I would disqualify them from my board, or they need a lot more time. And one of the guys that I heard in common that kind of got reject grades, at least from a couple of teams I know for sure, was Ridder. And he interviews very well on the whiteboard, and so he understands the game intellectually. He's got a big arm. You got to love that physically. He can move, so you love that as well. And he had production, and he played winning football. Well, those are those Bill Parcells, paint by the numbers. Let's eliminate a lot of our, these are the quarterbacks that make the grade that we can look at and start to evaluate versus quarterbacks that we're not even going to look at. The problem with that is some people take that too seriously to the point that they already select down without really studying the film of the player to the degree that they should. And when I watched Ridder, one of the biggest things that separate starters who get second contracts with the same team that they began with, and guys who become journeymen or are out of the league, is reading leverage. Brett Favre often talked about that he didn't know what a nickel defense was early in his career, but what he did extremely well, and what Patrick Mahomes does extraordinarily well, and so many other quarterbacks in the league, is that in addition to the whiteboard stuff, more important to that is that they process the game quickly. And part of processing as a quarterback is seeing the defender, the coverage in the area of the receiver you're looking at, and seeing immediately whether or not that's a dangerous throw or a throw that presents an opportunity to break open. And it doesn't matter whether it's what specific coverage it is there, because there's a lot of blends and hybrid coverages out there and a lot of little disguises going on, and it's happening so fast that in those 2 seconds before the snap and really 3 seconds after, really it's about seeing the flashes of color, seeing the leverage correctly, and having the picture in your mind of what the coverage looked like in that 2 seconds before to know what's open or not. And Ridder has a real problem with that. I find that he has a real problem with knowing what's dangerous and what's not dangerous. And that's a hard thing to fix if on the fundamental level of reading leverage, it's just not there. And repeatedly, I've shown this on Twitter, just like play after play of throws where it's like that shouldn't have been made. And he might have completed many of them, but they were also throws that in the NFL they don't project well because being open at Cincinnati might mean that a defender is 3 to 5 steps behind him. Being wide open in the NFL, a defender is a half a step behind you, and the leverage was why you made that decision. So I think that for me, you combine that with the mechanical flaws of where he has a wide stance and the ball either sails or drops depending on the distance that he's throwing. So he's going to have to fix that a little bit. And when your stance is wide like that, that means that you're also going to have to be really conscious of that with your drop game. And, when your drop game doesn't set up a good stance, then you're reworking some fundamentals there. And that leads to some issues with accuracy. And when, even a Baker Mayfield who didn't have as much of a mechanical issue with that at Oklahoma started to drift into that type of issue with the Browns while he was hurt and playing hurt. And you could see the accuracy just really suffer in his game. And so when I look at Ridder, there's some definite upside physically. He checks all the boxes that GMs look at when they watch ESPN and they decide that they're gonna follow what somebody says rather than what their scouts look at. But when the scouts start looking at tape, there's going to be concerns about this guy as more of a long-term project as opposed to an immediate starter. But he may get his chance early, and if he does, that early success he could have early success because of the arm. But when defenses adjust, he better have been working on the things I'm talking about, or else when those defenses see the tape and adjust, that regression is going to hit hard.
Okay. So it sounds like you would be in the camp of not being too overzealous of getting Ridder out in the field sooner rather than later. You would want to sit him at least a year, if not more, it sounds like.
I'd like him. Yeah, you're going to need to send him a year. And then if you felt like you're investing in him to be that starter, well, I hope that when you have your draft plan in place for the next couple of years, and you're trying to stockpile some picks or get an extra pick here or there, because there's a strong chance that you may need to go back to the well after you try out Ridder after next year. But if you see that he's shaped up some things and there's improvement with decision making, then he gets playing time at the end of this year, and you see that he's making good leverage reads, then maybe there's some hope. But that's what you're going to be looking for, is the accuracy with the wide stance, that you're not going to see unnecessary dives or sails, and knowing what's dangerous and what's not. And if he shows consistency there, maybe there's hope.
Okay. Well, Matt, I appreciate you joining me talking about these 3 players. I look forward to our future conversations, whether it's draft or Falcons related. But go ahead and plug your stuff. You guys some great content over there, so go ahead and plug that stuff.
Well, I appreciate it. You can find me at mountwaldmanrsp.com. That's the rookie scouting portfolio. It's been around since 2006. So you get a pre-draft and post-draft guide. It is one of the most looked at cross-checking pieces of content that you'll find among NFL scouts and personnel people, according to people like Alex Brown, who is SMU's scouting director and visits with scouts on a weekly basis as a part of his job, and other guys I know around in the league. It's great for fantasy. I've been in the fantasy game since 2003. I'm a senior staff writer at footballguys.com, one of the oldest and largest sites out there. And I also do projections and complete dynasty rankings that I just put out and at the rookie scouting portfolio, and do that throughout the year. And that's also available to service, and proceeds go to Darkness to Light, an organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse of children through training programs. Just donated $5,000 today, which was our goal for the sale, for the proceeds from the sales. And we've donated over $55,000 in the past 10 years to that organization. So we're really proud of the work that they're doing and love to be able to support them.
It's a great cause. And I imagine if anybody's out there about to have their dynasty drafts, you probably take Drake London early, but maybe hold off a little bit on Algier and Ritter. Does that sound accurate?
I would say that's the case. London's a good early pick. The rest of those guys, you can probably, I'd forget Ritter, to be honest, and just let him prove you wrong. And Algier, you can take late.
Okay, there you go. Well, Matt, I appreciate once again you joining me and look forward to our future conversations.
Same here.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us here. Thanks for Matt Waldman for sharing his insights. Tomorrow, as I said earlier, we'll be continuing our 2022 summer training camp previews, asking the big questions of the season at the running back position and, of course, the all-important fullback position on tomorrow's episode. And we'll keep, more of this, training camp content coming for the rest of the week. We should be able to get through the wide receivers and tight ends as well. Yeah, there's a guest coming up, but I think that's got pushed to next week. So we might even get through the offensive line if my not mistaken as well. No, we'll do the Justin Schaefer scouting report at the end of the week. So we'll get to Justin Schaefer before we get to the offensive line. So the offensive line, I guess, should be next week. And then, we'll be getting closer to July, and then we'll probably do the defense in July. If you're just curious, but we're going to still be going 5 days a week here on Locked On Falcons, providing you your daily content each and every day here about your Atlanta Falcons. So make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons, and thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. And of course, as recommendations for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL, check out the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft, and make sure you subscribe to Locked On Hawks or your favorite NBA team's YouTube channel so that you can watch the live pre-draft breakdown come Thursday night, guys. So that will do it for us here, guys. Appreciate you for tuning in for another episode of Locked On Falcons. Till then.